Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Exercise Mechanic Podcast. I am once again joined by the glorious Ryan and Brett. Gentlemen, how are you guys doing today?
Very good.
Good, dude. How are you?
Amazing, man. Yeah, really good, really good. I always have fatigue after teaching over the weekend. I don't know how you're feeling today, Rye, but I find any time after a weekend course, I'm always a little bit like, feels like there's a little bit of a hangover after a weekend. It's not because I drank too much, because I didn't drink at all, but just there's a low. Do you get that yourself?
Yeah, I've learned to just start taking the Monday off training completely, and I just push my training back a day.
Totally.
I was way too fired up about what I had learned to skip training yesterday. And I wanted to test it out immediately.
That's right. Yeah. So Brett, you were at the hypertrophy intensive this weekend, and then you said that you applied some of that stuff in your training. Like, how did that look?
So I kept the workout the same. I wanted to kind of like try out new techniques with familiar movements, and just kind of like focusing in on tissues and trying to like squeeze as much juice as I could out of like each exercise. Interestingly, like the reps either like went down or stayed about the same. But I was gassed. Like every last set that I did, I would like finish and just go like, holy shit. And normally I'm like a little like, ready to do the next one. But like, yeah, it really took it out of me in a great way. A little extra DOMs today, but otherwise pretty good.
That's cool. That's like a really, like a scientific method of like just being like, I'm going to change the fewest variables possible, and only thing really is just like tripling down on execution.
Exactly. I figured too, if I switched the exercise and technique, I would probably be suffering a lot more.
Totally.
Keeping the movements the same would kind of lead to a little less discomfort today.
No doubt. Ryan, from your end, man, how did you find this past weekend?
I think in terms of both our ability to deliver the information a little bit more concisely, as well as I think the engagement from this past weekend's group, I think it was probably the best one we've done. Mm-hmm. Obviously, for people that don't know, because they didn't attend our previous courses, I don't think we had finished on time any of the previous weekends.
The first weekend, I think we finished an hour and 15 late.
Hour. Yeah. Yeah. Whereas this time, I think we were a little bit better with our time management, having a better flow, which not only is good for us, but I think also like the learning experience is better because it's just less choppy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree. I would agree that I think this is the best one we've done so far, and the changes that we made where we essentially in previous iterations would do more in-class theoretical stuff and then go out on the floor and do the practical, whereas we essentially just brought the theory out on the floor. And the cool thing is that, and I'm not going to say we didn't really plan for this, but we didn't have it planned where I'm like, we're going to have more time to be able to do like workshopping. But what ended up happening was that we had more flexibility and we had more time to be able to break people up into groups and have more kind of practical segments, whether, like an example being, one group on the pendulum and one group on the Smith, having people, giving the students, the opportunity to kind of not only be the client, but to be the trainer and to be the observer. And I'm really happy with how that went. And it created so many really great moments for like adjunct conversations and, little anecdotes to kind of sneak in about things that are useful in our practices and stuff like that. So I agree, man. I think it went really well.
Yeah, you guys set up a really good rhythm of like, sit down to stand up content, because if you do too much of either, you're going to burn the person out, or they're just going to be like, like falling asleep by the end of the sit down session. So like having that bit of rhythm was great.
Nice.
A few times I felt like it got a little bogged down in questions, but I think answering those questions were important. Like I don't know what the way out of that is. Because it was a pretty like dense section, and I think a lot of people needed clarification on that stuff. But yeah, that was the only time that it felt like it kind of lagged a little bit. But otherwise, really, really good setup. I loved it.
Yeah, and that's a hard thing to strike a balance between, where it's like honoring questions that are relevant to the people that are there in front of us, and then also making sure that we don't go too far and then ultimately compromise pillar content. That's hard, right? And even like, you know, with a client, like in personal training, I'm sure there are parallels with this where like leaning into perhaps, you know, how would I say, like the opportunities that present themselves on a day-to-day basis. But if you completely deviate from the program, perhaps once, maybe that wouldn't be a big deal. But if that happens over and over and over and over again, then that would also be, you know, not fantastic to the client journey. So, but it's tough. It's tough. Yeah. You know,
yeah.
Go ahead, Ryan.
I was just going to say, I always think it's really funny. You know, each time that we've done the course, we always do a little bit of like a review, you know, after day one and then after day two, you know, what did we like? What do we want to change? Because we've sort of altered things, you know, either in small ways or in big ways after every single course. What I find is always quite funny is my perception is you always really enjoy the sections that I do, and I always really enjoy the sections that you do. Like every time I walk away, I'm like, ugh, like I wish we had a better flow for like my section. Because a lot of the stuff that I end up teaching is a lot of the very class heavy work. And it's, you know, it's pretty hard to teach nutrition in a practical setting. You just kind of have to go through the nuts and bolts of it. Whereas you always love those sections. I'm always trying to get more practical work for the mechanics piece, which is your side of things. So, I mean, it's probably a good thing that we're sort of championing each other's sections.
Totally.
But I always find it kind of a funny conversation because I want there to be more of your stuff and you want there to be more of mine, and there's this balance.
Yeah, totally. You know, I don't know if you would agree with this, but I think one thing that leads to that is that when you're teaching, it's easier for me to also observe the students and like not only see but register the level of engagement.
Yeah.
When I'm teaching, I think that my attention is a little bit more split, and it is, I think, maybe just a little bit more difficult to really grasp how engaged students are. And during your sections in particular, every single course, like when we start talking about the insulin sensitivity side of things, like students will go from sitting back in their chairs to leaning forward every time. And like there are numerous sections like that. Like when we're talking about nutrition periodization, that's another one. You know, like the efficacy of things like, and the usefulness of deloads, deload weeks, refeed meals, cheat meals, all that stuff. Like the body language of the students is that they like lean in more. And honestly, I fucking lean in too, because like every time that you teach, I'm there and I'm like I'm making notes, and I'm sure you've noticed sometimes I ask questions.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'll ask the question that I'm like, I'm pretty sure trainers have this question, so I'm going to throw it out there as a means of giving you an opportunity to talk about it. But also sometimes I'm like, no, I just have a question. You know, as one of the co-facilitators, you know, being there as a student as well, you know.
Well, I think for that particular. Sorry, go ahead, Ryan.
I was just gonna say, I think similarly, I always kind of joke. I'm always kind of like a meathead at heart. So to me, like the on-floor stuff where people are, you know, like Brett, you know, grunting and getting kind of his ass kicked, or one of the students, I think literally was like, I want you to end my life on this set. Like that shit to me is so fun. Yeah. So like I love leaning into that, which is more sort of the section that you lead. But it's funny because I do think both of us get an opportunity to sort of be a student, so to speak. And I think both of us get engaged as the student to the other person's sort of work. And I always find it really fun, like being involved in those weekends. And sorry, Brett, you were going to say something.
Oh, good. Yeah, I was just going to say, like, the particular content that, Etienne, you mentioned, like, people lean forward and kind of get into. I think a lot of that stuff, there's a lot of misinformation online and just like confusing information.
Yeah.
And just to have somebody who is like such a resource, like in the competitive field, like truly, not a lot of people will know this stuff as well as you do and with as much confidence. And to have somebody just kind of like spell it out for you right in front of you is, I think, really important. And I think that's what gets people engaged, and me too. That I had heard a lot of little bits, a lot of conflicting information, and just to hear like, okay, no, like this is actually how it works, and it comes with the level of nuance that everything from the exercise mechanic does, but it does help to really solidify a lot of kind of like disparate information that's been floating around.
No doubt, and I find like to kind of double click on that, there's I think a little bit of a misconception that nuance comes with insecurity, but at least in my experience, like just when you're well read, nuance and confidence aren't mutually exclusive. They absolutely can be present at the same time, even though maybe perhaps it isn't uncommon for them, nuance and insecurity to happen at the same time, or for nuance and confidence to be opposites. When someone's really well read on in a certain topic, providing a nuanced take confidently is, especially in the fitness industry, I find unfortunately is just not common. And also as a result of that, I think it's refreshing, and I think it creates a lot of trust for students. I had a consultation with a gentleman about 2 or 3 months ago who wanted to lose over 120 pounds. And he, I think I was the fourth or fifth trainer that he essentially interviewed to work with. And I was the only person that told him that it would take probably longer than like 8 months. And like, these are his words, and I'm kind of going back, so I won't remember them exactly, but he was just like, everybody blew smoke up my ass kind of a thing. Like, you're the only person so far that I've met with who I feel is actually telling me the truth. And the result of it is that he signed up, which is really great, really great, But I mean, it's odd how would I say, how it's maybe counterintuitive, how saying it depends in contrast to giving people absolute answers. I think that can make people feel insecure. But in the grand scheme of things, if you can just say the truth confidently, you get a lot of buy-in, whether it be from students or potential clients.
We should start a game for our listeners. Every time we mention the word nuance, they take a swig from their protein shake.
Protein shake would be good, yeah. In contrast to vodka, we don't want people...
Everybody's going to be jacked by the end of 40 minutes.
Let's go.
Nuance.
Let's go. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, take a nuanced approach to gains. Take a swig. Yeah.
I was going to say, what you were saying, ET, made me think of a couple of things. The first thing is kind of along the lines of being comfortable saying, I don't know, whether that to be a client or a student, depending on the capacity that your relationship is in. I've kind of updated my stance on that, which is that's part of a solution, like part of an answer. Mm-hmm. I think it's a more complete answer to say, I don't know, or I'm not sure. However, like, this is my best guess. Because I still think that there's something worth having, like, a direction, being like directionally correct, or having something actionable. And it's still not inaccurate, because you're still saying like, hey, like, I'm not 100% certain of this thing, but I can also narrow it down to these few options. And something for me that I think is really important, and I've actually talked about this with sort of trainers that are newer into their career, or junior trainers, when talking about sales, because that's always sort of the big dirty word as a fitness professional. And I always think of like reframing sales and reframing what it is that you're actually selling. And I like the idea of like you're selling solutions, but more to the point, you're selling your ability to solve those things quicker than they would be able to on their own. So it's like, my decade plus in like ET's decade plus and Brett's decade plus within the industry and our exposure to all of these, different situations, I might not have the perfect answer, but we might go through 2 things before we find the right solution as opposed to 25.
Right.
Like I can just narrow it down a lot quicker than maybe somebody else. And I think that's a really important thing. And it's also, it doesn't feel like an inauthentic sales pitch, so to speak. And to me, it also means, if you're a trainer, to be able to do that confidently, you got to lean into being educated to be able to provide those types of solutions for a client.
It's funny you mentioned that. I'm actually creating a sales training presentation for the staff at Titan Performance right now. And touching on a lot of those same points is like, attack it with like a problem solving mentality. Like this person is coming to you because they have an issue. You need to try to get to the bottom of that issue. But I really want to like lean into the fact like a lot of these are like sport coaches and they kind of drifted into this world specifically because they friggin' hate sales. And there's a reason they're not at Movati and Good Life. So I do want to really reframe it and kind of get them to think a bit more about like curiosity and empathy. Like we need to listen, we need to like find out what this person's issue is. And then once you've learned as much as you can, then you present a prescription confidently and say, I believe based on my experience, this is what you need to move forward.
100%. Yeah. I mean, like a quality sales conversation always flows outwards from understanding. Always, otherwise it's a square peg round hole type of situation. And you're just trying to jam a solution, I was gonna say jam a solution into a person, but that's a little weird. Don't do that. But you know what I'm saying? Like square peg round hole, trying to force a solution on somebody. Sorry?
I said P. Diddy strikes again.
P. Diddy strikes again. Oh no. Yeah, few P. Diddy references this past weekend. But yeah, man, it's just like sales become easy when you check yourself of like, listen, am I trying to sell this person something for the sake of just making money? Or am I actually coming from a place of caring? And if you are coming from a place of caring, one of the first things is understanding, or attempting to understand, asking questions, being curious, trying to understand their challenges so that way you can bridge the gap. And then, like you said, like once you understand that, one thing I find really useful in sales conversations is to also like echo that back to the client. So for instance, what I'm hearing is, and then you can say, give like a summary of like, these are the things that I'm hearing and this is the direction you want to go. Did I understand? Kind of giving them an opportunity to perhaps clarify, because if you're wrong, you want to clarify that before you move on to presenting solutions. And then from there, it ends up being really simple. Just like, well, hey, like here's what, in my experience, here's what you need. Here's how this looks. And then it's solution finding in contrast to the dirty word of sales,
Do you guys think that with younger trainers, some of the challenges might lie not just in the fact that they're new to sales, but the fact that they don't have a lot of life experience and that, empathizing with somebody else might be a bit more challenging? Yes.
Yeah, life experience and career experience. Go ahead, Rye.
Well, I was going to say, I don't know. I mean, I feel like everyone remembers their first, right, ET? I always remember my very first consult I did.
Oh,
yeah,
first
just
consult.
Personal training clients, yeah. First consult I ever did, I was 20 years old. And I had booked a consult at 6 a.m. And it was with like a single mother. Whatever.
Your first was at 6 a.m.?
6 a.m. Oh, dude, I was willing to work from the hop.
My guy.
So 6 a.m., single mother, she's probably 35 to 45, somewhere in that range. And I just, followed the Good Life script of, emotional interviewing. And this woman sobbed. Sobbed. I'm 20 years old and have no life experience. So I literally just like now, dear, to this lady. Like I had no capacity to deal with this conversation. Mm-hmm. And I always kind of laugh when I sort of think back to that. Because, that conversation, that situation now, I would feel very comfortable having that conversation with somebody, in a similar situation across the table from me. It wouldn't cause me any kind of anxiety. at 20 years old, I felt so awkward, so like ill-equipped to be able to do this. Clearly, this went nowhere. This person did not buy training. But I always think back to like, it was about as poorly a first consult could have gone for somebody. And it was definitely a learning experience.
You know, one question I have for you guys is like, you know, we're talking about life experience, but like, how would I say? I mean, I guess life experience could prepare you for that, but I feel like there's something really unique about getting in reps in a professional context. Like when you as a professional, when there's, in a way, it feels like something's on the line, and I don't think that that's necessarily true. But it feels like something's on the line. You know, you work in the industry, so you do want to find someone who would be a good fit. So it can sometimes be kind of messy reconciling just being there for the person while also concurrently not losing sight that you do have a service that you could offer if they're a good fit. I feel like that's just the kind of thing. So there's a student that I just finished doing mentorship with. When we first started working together, he was like, you know, I want to work with you in a mentorship capacity so that way I can become a trainer. And I was like, awesome. You know, and here's the educational path that I kind of painted it out for him. And then as we started taking some steps, it became evident that it's like, bro, you're smart enough. You need to get in the fucking trenches. Like you just need to start getting in reps. So he's like, I don't know how to do that. Like there isn't a good gym near my house. So like our time together was actually focused on getting him a job and moving him from one city to another, talking about strategies for interviewing, talking about like client acquisition strategies and stuff like that. And like, so he has a job now. He lives in India, and he might actually listen to this podcast at some point. But yeah, like there's only so much learning. Like you could role play the snot out of that with your manager of like, what do you do if a client comes in sobbing? But I don't know how well role playing would prepare you for that, in contrast to just like, you need to do a lot of consults. You need to be faced with the discomfort potentially of doing that, maybe putting your foot in your mouth on occasion and screwing up a little bit and trying to repair the relationship, what have you, you know, like, I don't know. It feels increasingly clear to me just how like there is no replacement for just time in the trenches.
I mean, Ryan, you mentioned that on the weekend specific to like sports training. Like if you want to be a better runner, you get out there and run. If you want to be a swimmer, you got to swim. Like the gym stuff helps. Continuing education is incredible and important, and you got to do it. But the best thing for you is to just do the dang thing. Like go out and train.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like, you know, to your point, ET, I think like making mistakes with people is important. Something that, you know, I think had served me well up until this point in my career is even those mistakes, besides, you know, learning how to handle certain situations better. We've talked about this, I don't know necessarily on previous podcasts, but we talk a lot about like the use of humor when it comes to like the service part with clients. Like making your clients laugh and have a good time matters a ton. And in my experience, one of the best things that you can do is like tell stories where your client gets to laugh at you. Like they love that stuff, and I'm like happy to tell stories that make fun.
You're
of
the king of self-deprecation for sure.
Oh, and like, which is going to bring me to this story because I think it's worth telling. Because you talk about putting your foot in your mouth, and this is like I put my whole damn leg in my mouth.
That's a big leg, man.
That's a big drumstick,
you got a big
dude.
head, though, so.
True. So I had this client where I ended up working with him for about 5 years or so. So luckily, this didn't damage the relationship. But I'm pretty sure this was the first session that I had with this guy. He had trainers before me for, again, maybe 4 or 5 years previous. And, you know, just getting to know the guy, I knew that he was like a big sports guy. And so we get talking about something about like hockey. He hates the Toronto Maple Leafs, and we're like, you know, joking about, you know, not liking the Leafs, whatever. And because I felt like this was a safe bet for people that don't know much about hockey. in the like late 90s, early 2000s, like the most hated Maple Leaf would have probably been Ty Domi. I'm pretty sure he has the NHL record for most fights in NHL history.
I remember him. Yeah. The guy was just a pit bull.
Totally. So we're talking, and then I say something. I was like, yeah, agreeing with him. I'm like, and Ty Domi is a giant piece of shit. And he looks at, and like not smiling, looks at me in the eye, goes, Ty Domi's my best friend. And I go, no, he's not. And he pulls his phone out, and the last person that he had a call with that morning was Ty Domi. And I just was like, I just looked at him, I was like, I got nothing, man. Like, don't know what else to say to that. I mean, he was cool about it, and we had a good laugh, but I was like, what are the odds? He grew up in the same hometown, they're like the same age, but I called his best friend a giant piece of shit to his face. So
that's funny. Yeah, and talk about like the skill of being able to repair. And you said like using humor. I'm just curious. Like, do you remember what happened after that? Like, how did you navigate that? I'm curious.
Oh, I just like I did not apologize for calling him a piece of shit. I just was like, oop. And then he just like laughed about it. I mean, I think if you're Ty Domi's friend, you probably know how people like view him. Yeah. And then I think I just was like, oh, like, how do you guys know each other? And then we just started talking about it.
Right.
It was pretty easy to navigate. But, I remember just being like, you gotta be fucking kidding me. Like, really?
Yeah. I mean, in a way, like, I could see how, in a way, you were lucky that the guy also didn't make a big deal out of it. Like, imagine had he got really kind of confrontational or didn't just kind of brush it off, but was like, no, we're going to talk about this. you know?
Yeah.
Let me give you like an itemized list of why Ty Domi's the shit and that he's not a piece of it, you know?
You rescued my son.
That's right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Saved my son from drowning. How dare you?
Yeah. And an old lady from a burning building. You're the piece of shit, right? That's funny. Bringing it back to kind of the course this past weekend, one of the topics I wanted to table today was just what makes a good student. And I'm curious what comes to mind for you guys with regards to that.
You just said the word. Curious.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's a big one. Just like going in just knowing that you don't know everything, and like whether or not you disagree with content, because like sometimes you are, at least like come into it with an open mind and make some space for it. I mean, we're gonna say nuance again, aren't we?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Take a swig. That's right.
I would agree with what Brett said, and then the only thing I would really add to that, quite honestly, is someone who's engaged. I think that learning is it's an activity. It's not something that you do passively. Whether that be for this particular course, when we actually use some of the sort of workshop stuff, actually being physically involved. But quite honestly, you talked about earlier just time management with like the discussion piece. That's actually partly for myself how I gauge if the students are interested in that particular section, is how much conversation does it actually sort of drive. So if students are asking questions and potentially challenging me on certain things, I actually view that as a really good thing. As opposed to if they're just sitting in silence the whole time. My instinct is I don't put the blame on them at first. Like, I've clearly done a horrible job of delivering this if they're just bored out of their minds.
Yeah.
But I do think there very much is this like symbiotic relationship between teacher and student. And the more engaged they are, it also makes our lives easier. And then we can customize the teaching to them as well. So, it's very much something where I think the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, depending on how engaged people are.
Yeah. But like, so if we kind of double click on the curiosity piece and having an open mind, I'm sure you've noticed that it's not always the case, whether it be person to person, and like not every new trainer is necessarily has a mind that's as open as others. And like even myself, I've been through seasons when my mind was more closed, and fortunately I got humbled by people early in my career that like jammed that door open. I probably just ripped the door off the hinges, so now it can only ever be open, And so I really credit that to some of my first mentors. But like, how would I say? It's normal, I think, or at the beginning of a journey, you know, when you learn stuff, you initially know that you know nothing. You learn a certain amount, and then you think that that's kind of, that you know it all. And I forget the name of this kind of curve.
Is it Dunning-Kruger?
Is that it?
Yeah.
Yeah, Dunning-Kruger, yeah. And where you learn a little bit, and then you're just like, I'm the king of the world because I now understand program design. And then, you know, but so many people get stuck there. But if you don't, and you know, the following journey is this accumulation of nuance and like, holy crap, I don't know anything, and things are really complex. But I don't know. I guess a question that I would have for you guys is like how to nurture or how to get students to open their minds, perhaps if it's closed, or how would you maybe how to be aware of when you yourself have a closed mind on a certain topic. Like, what would be some things to look for?
I'm still figuring that out for myself.
Yeah.
For other people, I think I'm a bit more gentle, and I'm probably more apt to like take a slower approach and try to like ask some questions and get to the bottom of where they're at. Having said that, I have had some really productive work when somebody does, as you say, blow the door off the hinges or like bust through this wall I've built like the Kool-Aid Man.
Oh yeah.
and it's harsh, like I feel like it takes less time, but the emotions are a lot more intense. It's like, you know, there's some resistance, and then like, you know, some shame, and then you kind of got to build it back up. I don't know if that's better or worse than like going through that a bit more slowly and kind of like, you know, tapping into it bit by bit.
Yeah, I would. So I'm actually thinking of the last time we taught in Edmonton. You know, we had one particular student who was very, very resistant to a few ideas when we were teaching.
Right.
And I remember we had remarked on, we had remarked on the difference between his attitude day one and day two, I think was huge.
Yeah.
I think part of this, you know, I think Brett and I actually spoke about this over the weekend, about the relationship of like a coach and a client, but I very much think this applies, you know, student and teacher. I sort of think of when you're in this position of, for lack of a better word, sort of like authority, I think of it almost as like parenting. Like it needs to be thankless. Like it's not my job to feel like I'm smarter than him or I know better. My job's to help him.
Yep.
And we just kind of stayed on him. And I think not getting emotional with him and just having conversations, part of what I identified as well is a lot of time when people are really pigeoned or like dug into a certain position, we sort of spoke about this last week, like your opinions aren't your personality, and often when they are, they're bred from this place of insecurity. So the last thing that you want to do if you actually want to have change is challenge this person publicly, because you're challenging their identity. They're just going to double and triple down. But being able to have like a side conversation or a private conversation and logic through certain things, I think there's a little bit less of an opportunity for them to feel offended.
Yeah.
And I also think taking the time to show that you care breaks down some of those walls a little bit. So that's a lot of the time. I think identifying that most of the time those people who are really rigid, there's a reason why they're rigid, and it's something from like an emotional level. And I think being able to, just as like a human being, have the right approach to sort of assuage that feeling is, to me, like the key to at least starting to open that door.
Yeah, I love that. And to just kind of provide a little bit of context for the listeners, what Ryan's kind of alluding to is on day one, this student, like you had said, was a little bit more closed or resistant to certain ideas. And then after myself and Ryan spent some time with him, and I would say even yourself more than me, the next day, his level of engagement and even playfulness, I would say,
was awesome.
Yeah. And day one, it was like, like a little bit more closed. Day two, he was in the ring with us and the other students, having a variety of conversations. And you mentioned you mentioned a few things that I want to circle back to, because you mentioned like how sometimes people's attachment to certain ideas is emotional, and I've definitely noticed that for sure. In his instance, it wasn't perhaps just that. He was also like a really like smart guy. Like he wasn't just like oblivious to things. He was just like, no, like this is the exposure to information that I've had, and for all of these reasons, this is what I currently believe to be true, kind of a thing. And then what we had to do was provide perhaps a little bit more nuance, take a swig, challenge certain ideas, and then little by little, there were some gaps where we were able to step in and be like, and that's where this would fit, and that's where this other concept would fit. And usually, the interesting thing as well is that it's usually not black or white. Like we talk a lot about taking a nuanced approach, which means that like other than at the extremes, it's various shades of gray. So it's not like what we're saying is true and that refutes everything else. Sorry, what'd you say?
I said 50 shades, one might say.
50, yes, yeah, exactly, yeah. Maybe more than just 50 shades of gray. But like, it's usually not like, yes, this is true over here, but everything else is wrong. It's a yes and type of circumstance where it's like what he was bringing to the table is accurate in certain contexts and moments, and also there's room for these other how would I say? There's room for these other perspectives that will be useful in other circumstances,
I also think, to add to that, so long as you're coming from a position of like being empathetic, I also think there is a skill with like debate and persuasion. Mm-hmm. So this is something where I, as you kind of pointed out this weekend, I have some ADHD tendencies. So one of the topics that I got hyper focused on.
ADHD has some Ryan tendencies. Actually, it's the other way around.
One of the topics that I got incredibly interested in. So there was a period of time where I read actually quite a bit about like organized religion, which like right. I myself, I'm not religious, but I just found it to be really fascinating, which then led me into reading a lot about like epistemology and just like having a better understanding of essentially like how do we logically find our way to what our opinions are. And there's sort of a term called street epistemology, but it's like a method of how to get people to change their minds or be open-minded to change without being like confrontational with them. So a lot of it is you actually guide them asking questions where they get to a point where the stance that they have, they realize is contradictory to all the other things that they've said. Mm-hmm. And you kind of
like Socratic method.
It's exactly Socratic method. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So you basically back people into a wall, like into a corner logically, where they've realized that something's got to give. It doesn't always work, but it's a very powerful method to get people to start to be able to like change their mind on something. If you just say, hey, you're wrong, they're going to say, no, I'm not, you're wrong, and then you just end up with this battle, and it doesn't work, right?
Yeah.
Where if you like concede a little bit of ground and you ask questions and you get them to explain themselves, it's actually a really productive method for, just like debate.
Totally. Yeah. Asking questions in contrast and giving them an opportunity to perhaps show through the questioning where the gaps are. Right? In contrast to, like you said, just being kind of combative out of the gate.
Yeah.
And that I would say takes work. You think of like the time, for instance, if we pull on this thread of this gentleman who we had a conversation with a few months back, that took like one of the reasons why you spent more time with him than I did is that I had to keep teaching.
Yeah.
And I had to keep going, right? And fortunately, and I mean that, fortunately you were there to be able to kind of nurture this gentleman and the conversations that were being had, and to kind of nurture him in a certain direction. Because I think, how would I say, it takes more work to...
I find it takes a lot of patience too. Like my
patience.
first instinct is just to like tell. As soon as I find a misunderstanding, it's like, no, it's actually this. But like to take the time to like, okay, what is the right question to ask here to try to get them to the place is a lot more work, and it takes some patience to just kind of like get your own mind there, I find.
Yeah. And this is like, I find like if we're talking about social media discourse, like this is one of the reasons why I really tend to not engage on social media with folks that sometimes my students and actually and also friends. Ryan, you'll sometimes send me things and you're like, hey man, check this out. And I'm like, no, I'm not gonna bite. I'm not gonna bite. But like,
I do it exclusively for that reason, though.
That's right. Just to like increase my blood pressure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you know exactly. Like, there's one fitness professional in particular whose content you send me all the time. And actually, oddly enough, the tables turned. I sent you his stuff yesterday.
I know. Yeah.
Yeah, but you know, it's that when it comes to having these types of discourses, like you said, it is a lengthy process. You need to unpack a lot of things. There is like so many, at least in my experience, I don't know if you guys would agree with this, there are usually so many presuppositions that are kind of embedded into what other people are saying. And sometimes you need to talk about the presuppositions that are informing the logic jumps that they're making. And if you're just kind of superficially talking about the logic jumps, but you're not addressing the presuppositions, then you usually just don't get anywhere. And the other thing that I find is really tricky also is language. You know, you look at like someone using the word. We talked about this briefly in the class this weekend, but when people use the word stability, for instance, for probably 50 different fitness professionals, you would have 50 different definitions. And functional, right? Or stable. Like, you know, I don't know. It's just like there are, and so until you define the word and what it means and perhaps presuppositions associated to the thing, it basically becomes an impossibility to have any type of productive conversation to open the subject, because you're not even on the same page. You're not using the same codex to communicate. And so, yeah, it becomes tricky. And so that's why, like, on social media, that's why I just usually don't engage with people unless they're willing to, like, out of the comment section to, like, hop on a call or to, like, actually flesh things out. Otherwise, it just ends up being, how would I say? It ends up just being confrontational in contrast to productive.
On that note, like when I just graduated and I was just looking for jobs, I was a math tutor briefly. And I had this one grade student who was actually in French immersion, and so I was able to actually like do math French tutoring with her, which was awesome. But she was in grade 10, having just like a ton of problems with just kind of like a lot of different things for a lot of what seemed like different reasons. Like, you know, adding and subtracting fractions, you know, doing any kind of like long equations. And it took a couple of sessions with her rather, but eventually we nailed down she never really got the concept of adding and subtracting positive and negative numbers. And so once we took like 2 sessions just to like, you know, practice, create like visual guides, number lines, and realize that she's moving up and down and stuff like that. After that, like everything seemed easy. And so like diving down and finding out what that supposition is deep down and kind of like addressing that first sometimes just makes all the other dominoes fall.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that. Again, this makes me think of a math story from my university days. So I really liked math in school, and I believe it was my second year calculus, and we were doing differentiable equations. And our final exam, essentially, if your exam grade beat your term grade, then it replaced it. So at this point, I was like, well, I need to write 100% exam. Like this, I'm going all in on this. And there is a section of our curriculum where we studied things called Taylor series, Maclaurin series, and Fourier series. which are essentially just ways of using sequences and series to integrate trigonomic functions. This is irrelevant. It is the...
That'll be another podcast.
Yeah, we're not here for a math lesson. But essentially, it's the only thing I've ever encountered in a math class that, like, I didn't fucking get it. Which is when it comes to just, like, mathematics, is, like, a really rare experience for me. And I remember studying it, and then just being to the point, I'm like, I don't fucking get it. I'm just closing my book, and I'm going to hope for the best. And I was lucky enough that the way that they had done our final exam, it was multiple choice. Ooh, I hit my mic. It was multiple choice. So I actually just took, there was like one or two questions I think that was on this. And I just took each of the answers and I did it backwards. And then until it got whatever the equation was that was in the question. And that was actually how I didn't know how to solve it. I just worked backward from what the options were to eliminate what the wrong ones were. So, and I did end up getting 100% on it, but I just remember being like, I don't fucking get this. To this day, I still, like, clearly this has been 11 years, and this is like a prominent thought that I have in my brain.
It's still an open loop, unsolved.
I don't know if this is an ADHD thing, but, like, in school, so... I mean, I was also decent at math and science. I didn't do a lot of studying. And so I would come into tests and be like, well, I don't know what I'm doing. And to the point where, like, I wouldn't even know the equations that we were supposed to use on the test. So sometimes I would be the last person there because I would be figuring out the equations we needed to use from scratch before I was able to do any of the questions. And I did pretty well, but, like, it's an idiotic way to do things. Like,
I remember it's weird. I would say as a student, I would define myself, I cared a lot about learning. I always have. Like, I found it interesting to learn more skills. I don't have enough of an ego that didn't like to be bad at stuff. But I definitely did not do more work than I thought that I needed. So I, like, hardly ever studied. At the time, for what my undergraduate degree was, I didn't have a lot of options for, what do you call them? Not the courses required for your degree.
Electives?
I'm drawing a blank. Electives, thank you. I didn't have a lot of, I think I only had one elective in my first year. So I took, like, psych, 101 essentially, of which I went to half the classes, because they had open gym basketball at the same time, and I wanted to play basketball instead.
There you go.
So I didn't go to the lectures, and then the lectures that I did go to. So at Carleton University, one of the biggest theater halls is called Kalesh Mattel Theater, and it's like 70 degrees Fahrenheit. The seats are squishy. It is like nap central. So I just slept through most of the lectures that I actually attended. And I remember I took my textbook out of the plastic wrap the morning of my final exam. Context of this, my girlfriend at the time is like the perfect student that you could ever come up with if you were a teacher. Did every extra piece of work, studied, all of that stuff. And I believe she got an A in this class. I ended up getting an A+ because I just read the final summaries of each section before I did the exam, and then had enough recall that I got most of the answers right. I remember, this was one of those things where, again, friends, family, they're so mad at me because they're just like, "Are you fucked? This, you don't deserve this." I'm like, I agree. I agree with everything that you said. And this is going to perpetuate the same behavior that I keep doing because it worked.
Right.
Yeah, it took a few years of university before I figured out how to study and do homework, and I mean I still wasn't that great for it at it until I got on ADHD meds. And suddenly it's
Fair.
oh yeah, I can sit down and do work now. That's nice.
Yeah.
There's something to be said about working smarter, not harder, right? And so if you I'm sure that's not something necessarily that would be fruitful in all contexts, but sometimes if that's all you need, then that's all you need, and the rest is not necessarily going to give you the greatest returns, other than perhaps if you're going to work in the profession and you need to know more than just the summaries, kind of a thing. But funny story for myself, when I was doing my kin degree, one of my favorite classes was Psych 101 or Psych Level 1. And I had a mega crush on my teacher. and she's this like Middle Eastern woman. At the time I was 20. How old was I? It's like 23. She was like mid to late 40s, and she had this like beautiful voice, and she has influenced my favorite word in the English in the English language, which is acetylcholine. When she was talking about neurotransmitters, I was just like, girl, stop. Like, or don't stop. Acetylcholine.
So
and I was like,
That's funny.
You do have a thing for the older academic women, eh? Esther Perel, you've got a crush on too.
Esther, who doesn't?
Honestly, fair.
Yeah. Esther Perel is, she's special.
I got a mathematician I'm going to send you, Etienne. Like, not like, conventionally supermodel hot, but like,
into?
she talks about, the way she talks about math, I'm like, oh my God, you're so passionate about it, and you love this so much, I can't help but like feel attracted. And it's not like, it's more of like a human attraction, right? It's at least for me, it's not like, a weird sexual thing. It's more like just like you are so competent and confident and in what you're doing, like I can't help but be in awe.
Yeah.
So this actually I know this conversation's going way away from what we were previously talking about, but I actually think this is an interesting topic because it's something that I've discussed quite a bit. I don't know if you guys feel this way on the note of like attraction to people. Because I actually think things like people's intelligence, their passion, their sense of humor, etc., like these are qualities, whether it be romantic or not, like make a person attracted. Like you want to spend more time with them.
Yeah.
And something that I have noticed, essentially having my whole adult life be in the fitness industry, people being really physically fit, like being like, super sexy on the outside, doesn't matter that much to me. Because the novelty of that is worn off. I've worked in gyms my whole life. I've been around very fit, good-looking people my whole life. So that just doesn't matter all that much, which I think kind of allows you to be drawn to people in a way that I think is a little bit more like authentic and beyond skin deep. And I genuinely believe having more exposure in the fitness industry has like allowed for that. I don't know if you guys have a similar experience at all.
Brett?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, like, I mean, I've never really, I unlike you guys, I was never part of like a big corpo gym. I kind of got into it in like weird small gyms because I'm a weird dude, and those are the places that kind of draw me.
Not a small dude.
Is where you were accepted.
Exactly. Yeah, the only places that would take me. I actually, this is a total aside, I was asking a client once who she thinks my clients are, and her answer was a high-funcking weirdos. And it's pretty accurate. There isn't a lot of, like, carryover between my clients. They're all, like, very good at what they do, and they're all totally weird. But anyways, I totally forgot what I was talking about there. Oh, yeah, I don't know if like the exposure was ever like huge for me. I think I've always been kind of more attracted to like values and personalities. Like even my wife and I don't have a lot of like hobbies in common, and never really did, other than like liking music, even though our like tastes are really different. But like our core values and what we think are important are very similar, and that's what's kind of like kept us close this long.
Yeah, my wife and I very similar to you, Brett, in that regard. Where from a hobbies perspective, we have like outdoor activities like hiking, cycling, etc. We have that in common. But when it comes to like training or even just the intensity of those activities, like if we're hiking, I'm like, let's fucking go. Let's turn this, like, I want to be tired by the end of this. Like, I also value where she's like, no, this is like a time to like chill and slow down. And I'm like, let's go. They'll like do like laps
I
around.
am your wife.
That's right. You're my work wife. Yeah, a little bit different. We will be sharing a bed in van, so who knows? Maybe you'll just be.
That's true.
Maybe you'll just be my big bear by the end
I don't
of
think it's
the.
a king size bed either. I think it's going to be a tight fit.
No.
We're gonna be spooning. But I think coming back to your question, Ryan, I think for me, it's actually reinforced certain things. I find I find health incredibly attractive. Now, of course,
I agree with that.
And individuals who actively practice health promoting behaviors, I find that very attractive, and a high percentage of the time, those folks also tend to be fitter and tend to have lower body fat levels. Not the case all the time. I have, and it's just worth double clicking on. Like, I have some clients who have like a lot of body fat, or more body fat than what would be considered, like, you know, like perhaps socially that which we should, like, or how we should endeavor to be. And I find them as people, like, really attractive people because of how much they value health. And so I think, to your point, it's gone past skin deep, so to speak. You know, it's not just about superficial looks, but I've discovered through my time in the industry that I really, 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 really value health. Yeah. And folks who actively practice health promoting behaviors, for me, I find that attractive. But sorry, everybody, I'm already married, so you know, now you know the key to my heart, right? It's broccoli. But I'm off the menu.
Well, this was something actually came up with one of the students, I think at lunchtime on the Saturday, and he was asking me, you know, it was like a guy that essentially wanted to be like bigger. Mm-hmm. And something I always tell people, I think Brett, you and I may have had this conversation the following day. Something I always tell people, I'm like, as a guy who was a young 20-something that just wanted to be bigger, and now I'm a guy who's 270-something pounds at 5'10", like, it isn't really all it's cracked up to be. You know, I'm this body weight and this size strictly from the fact that, like, it's required for the sport that I do. But the rest of it kind of sucks. And then we kind of got talking where, you know, I was saying to him, because I think there's some, I don't want to extend my reach too far, but I think there's some certain, like, insecurities that he might have that I think a lot of people think that their physical stature is going to sort of fill that void. Right. And I was kind of saying to him, I was like, man, I remember I actually had a coach very early in my powerlifting career who had talked to me, and it just sort of stuck with me, this idea of, I don't want lifting weights to be the most interesting thing about me. Mm. And I would say this is something where, you know, our friendship, most of my closest friends, the thing that we really bond over kind of isn't fitness that much, you know? Yes, they're all people, as you said, E.T., like, they care about their health, they're active people. That's a quality that I find attractive. But I could fucking care less if my friends were interested in bodybuilding. Yeah. Half the time that might actually be a deterrent. I really like that my friends are, as Brett said, like, you know, high-functioning weirdos and whatever else.
Neurodivergent.
Neurodivergent, yeah, probably. There's probably a few ADHD people in there. But I think there's something that's really important, you know, if there's like a lesson that I would take away from this is, you know, obviously fitness has essentially shaped my life, even well before I was a trainer. You know, I literally had my first pair of skates when I was 4 years old. I've never had a life that didn't have physical fitness in some capacity be kind of a central theme. So even with that being said, I think it's so important to have other things be a part of your life in order to have, like, a really fulfilling, fruitful life. I mean, you can have an interest that is, you know, like, I've been lifting weights seriously for 18 years, and I'm as passionate about it now as I've ever been. And there's other shit that I like, and if this ends one day, I'll be fine, because I have other stuff that I like. I've got friends that like me for, you know, they don't care, but they probably hate that I'm a bodybuilder because it's inconvenient. But I think that's like walk. A really important lesson. Oh, I know. Especially because I have so many friends that are interested in outdoor activities. I'm like, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
I'll meet you at the end.
Yeah, that's right.
I find that there's some people who it's a real challenge to kind of branch outside of, like, you know, whatever their niche is. For me, it's like it's survival. Like there's no other way I could imagine living other than being a guy who is like plays music on the side and really enjoys literature and like gets into films and like, you know, does like geometry homework for fun to de-stress. Like that, like it's just like who I am, and like I could not live any other way. But you're absolutely right, Ryan. Like I think everybody should, but for, like there's no other way for me. Like I could not
I think
do it.
Brett and I are more similar than I realized. Yeah. I was like, movies, nice. Music, nice. Math, nice.
Hey, geometry homework?
Geometry,
now
nice.
We're talking. Yeah, I'm the outlier here.
Yeah.
But it's funny, even like what you guys were talking about in terms of like excelling at school. Like for me, I was the one that had tutors on tutors and would scrape by with like 50 something. Interestingly, the moment that led to my me getting better in school, specifically math, because that was a topic that I always had a lot of trouble with, was actually my good friend Chris Fudge, who's we're releasing his episode I think in a week or two, because we had him on the podcast, and I shared my struggles with him about math, and he was like, "Oh man, it's just games." He's like, "You've got numbers, and then you have like tools that you can use to solve games. Like it's just a game, but with numbers." And it kind of it reframed how I viewed mathematics, and it went from something that I was frustrated with and resistant to, because I viewed math as being like the furthest from a game ever, and then kind of, I think, relaxing my mind a little bit and viewing it with a little bit of playfulness. Quite literally, I remember because I was missing some credits to then start my kin degree, so I had to go to l'Cité Collégiale in Ottawa. For the English people, that's called La Cité Collégiale. Is the name of it in Ottawa. And my first semester, I had calculus, algebra and functions, physics, chemistry, and biology. So a very fun semester. The classes I did the worst in were chemistry and biology. The ones that I got, I think the one that I did the best in was actually calculus. Second best was algebra and functions, and then physics was like close third. But like the top three were all like above 90. And it was really interesting, like as someone who always struggled with math, to just have, fortunately, thanks to a friend, reframing my relationship with the thing, which all of a sudden led to me being receptive to it. And
cool. I got something to bring the conversation full circle.
Yeah, let's do it.
How many kids do you think struggle with a particular subject just because they had one crappy teacher at some point in their past who just killed whatever passion or whatever interest they could have had in it, and then they just got this negative association with the thing forever, and you don't want to think about it. If like math reminds you of like Mrs. So-and-so who really sucked, like I don't want to think about math every day.
Yeah.
And how important are good teachers to you know, bring this stuff to kind of like the front of your brain for the rest of your life. Yeah, totally. And like, you know, creating safety, like if there's been a like lowercase t traumatic or painful event flowing outwards from a certain teacher that kind of like attaches itself to certain subject matter. Like for me, it's actually art. When I was younger, I had a lot of trouble in art class, and I remember my teacher, grade 6 at my elementary school, fucking shamed me in front of like the class. Like Point and Laugh was laughing at me because I was tracing, in contrast to having the photo and trying to draw it. I felt so Brian's got a sad face going on. I want to like hug you, man.
Yeah, no, but for real, like so few thoughts. Number one, fuck that guy. Still haven't forgiven him. But also, like it's really still to this day led to me just being kind of like rejecting the arts as a practice, and like there might be a lot for me there, but I'm just not interested in like dipping my toes into those waters. So to your point, you know, like instructors who can create safety for their students, kind of giving them the opportunity to perhaps heal those things or what have you, I think is a real gift.
I'll share this story as an example of not a teacher being an asshole, but myself being the asshole. So when I was in high school, you know, I typically had pretty good grades. I had a chemistry teacher for grade 11 and grade 12. And the irony of this whole situation is, like, in grade 12, I fucking loved her. She was awesome. Mm-hmm. However, in grade 11, I remember we had, like, done some lab report. I think back to this, I'm like, oh, what a shitty, like, 16-year-old like behavior I had. She had marked my lab report down for a couple of things because while I had conclusions that were correct, I like didn't show a bunch of work on things. Because in my head, I was like, yeah, I just know how to do this. So I got like a 75 or something on this, which typically I'd get like, you know, like a 90 or a 95. And I had like gone up and asked her about it. And as she started explaining it, and I sort of like got the answer I was expecting, which I thought was dumb. I told her to go fuck herself, and I threw my lab paper in her face, and I left the class. And I remember, Miss Granville, if you're listening to this, I'm really sorry. That was terrible. The door shut behind me, and I was just like, that was bad. Shouldn't have done that. Yeah. And honestly, like, to her credit, she was a total beauty about this. I like apologized to her later in the day, and she was just like, you know what? She's like, I've got boys. I get it. Tempers happen. But also don't ever do that again. I was like, fair game. Yep. Cool.
Well handled. That's funny.
Yeah. No. And then, like I said, the irony was I ended up really, really liking her as a grade 12 teacher. But the flip side, I was the rigid learner in that situation. So
yeah.
We've all had those moments.
Yeah, no doubt.
So don't tell your teachers to fuck off. So
yeah, I never told a teacher to fuck off, but there was one time where my English teacher, David Warnock was his name. Great last name. We always call him Warlock, which is great. And I wasn't paying attention, so he told me I was sitting on my brains. So I stood up and looked under my butt, and I'm like, no, I'm not. just being a shit, and he was just like, get out. And I was like, no. So anyways, there is hope, you know. I think like even us, how would I say, where you know, younger in our younger years, we're not necessarily the best learners, can, you know, grow into, I think, proficient learners with open minds. As we start to wrap up, what would be a piece of advice that you would give the listeners, you know, when it comes to, you know, maintaining an open mind in the fitness space?
I think for me, the biggest thing is the point isn't to be right. When you're in a learning environment, you're trying to prove yourself wrong. And I think trying to dissociate your ego from having the correct answers when you're in that situation is really important to learn.
Yeah, I agree. Brett, how about you?
I mean, I'm going to go for something a lot less deep, but something that has helped me out a lot is just like take notes. Putting pen to paper just helps recall. If you can then go back to those notes and read them again, even better. But yeah, just like as people are talking, job interviews, meetings, I'm always jotting stuff down, and a lot of times it isn't really like necessarily something I have to review later, but the amount of times that I forget something because I haven't written it down, but then, you know, another thing, I'll remember it even without looking at it because I have written it down, is, yeah, I think that's an important skill, even if it's a small one.
Yeah. I think for me, what comes to mind, similar to Ryan, in that for me, it's about remembering like why you're there in the first place. And, you know, in the case of the fitness industry, it's truly, I mean, there's just the passion and the interest in it, but it's to serve others. And it's not about you. It's not about being right. It's about making progress and being on the journey of like continuously approximating the truth. And for me, anytime that I notice I'm stuck or I'm resistant to something, that for me is my sign to check myself. Anytime that I'm like no to someone, that for me is a sign to kind of look inwards and to be like, okay, like what is it that's feeling attacked right now? What am I resistant to? And then re-engaging with whatever that person has to say to see if there's anything there that I can learn from that would ultimately help me on my journey.
Wow, your guys' answers were way better than mine.
It's okay, man. You know, it's podcast number 3 or 4 for you. It's going to be better. It's going to be.
That's all right.
No, I'm just
See,
playing.
the funny thing, I was like, that's a great answer. That's
Yeah,
so
totally.
good.
Totally. Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen,
What a stupid thing I said.
that's right. Shit. Edit.
I mean, it's back to the way you guys were talking about building yourself or each other up, right? We're always our own harshest critics.
Totally.
And we're always going to feel the other person did better. Grass is always greener.
Absolutely.
Y'all are perfect just the way you are.
Aw, thanks, babe.
Oh, thanks, buddy.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for today. I appreciate you both. I hope you guys have a great day, and we'll connect on the next one.
You betcha.
All right. Later.